A very warm welcome to our esteemed speakers and the distinguished members of the audience. My name is Sunita. I'm the Chairman of Climate Governance Malaysia and a member of the Steering Committee of the CEO Action Network. Both organizations are organizing this series of roundtables. Why are we doing this? Because businesses are the leading emitters of greenhouse gases around the world, contributing to global warming. And this series of roundtable engagements with key ministries in government and with civil society is the private sector trying to play our part. And specifically, this initiative is led by directors and CEOs. Collectively, our focus is on making sure that companies play their part in increased sustainability and climate ambitions, because companies can make a huge difference in the fight against the triple crisis of climate change, biodiversity, and pollution. Ladies and gentlemen, CAN and CGM are really honored to have you with us today. We all have a common goal in moving the economy forward on climate action. And to be really effective in moving the needle, we need clear and predictable government policy. So the roundtable sessions focus on policy recommendations in high impact areas which can significantly lower carbon impacts and get us on the road to a lower emissions pathway. Today's session is on the important role which the telecommunications industry has to play, as we have all learned during this pandemic. And moving forward, what government policies could support this industry and country in being more climate resilient. Out of these roundtables, CAN and CGM will prepare a report to the government, compiling all the suggestions of how we could collectively contribute towards more ambitious mitigation and adaptation efforts. This report will be timed to be submitted in the run-up to November's COP26 conference in Glasgow. We all want to play our part in building a whole of society, all of government engagement between all stakeholders in Malaysia. And on a personal note, this is the last of 14 incredible roundtable sessions convened in just 5 months with thousands of listeners who are now much better informed and far more engaged in conversations about our climate resilience. I have been overwhelmed by the response, the support, the encouragement received from so many who have stepped up. In particular, I would like to thank the hardworking and committed team from Petronas Tenaga, PwC Shell for organizing the energy sector roundtables, Sime Darby Property, REDA, Green RE, and the building sector representatives for organizing the property and construction sector discussions, Sime Darby, MGTC, and many plantation sector experts, to Microsoft and the CGM volunteers who have worked tirelessly in the background to ensure each session ran smoothly, with recordings and blog post highlights being made available soon after each session. We could not have pulled off this extraordinary achievement without you. And there will be one final roundtable session after today, sometime in October, to deep dive into the final report, the findings of all sessions. For today, we are deeply appreciative to have the support of our speakers. I think it is extremely rare to have 6 CEOs on a panel agreeing to share the spotlight. The moderator is going to introduce each of them, but I can vouch that they all feel deeply about the sustainability agenda and have outsized personalities. So we are very glad to leave them in the hands of our skillful moderator, Dr. Gary Theseira, Technical Advisor to MGTC, who has been part of the Malaysian delegation for a whopping 13 COPs as National Negotiator. In addition, as a sign of respect which Malaysia commanded around the world, he was also selected to be spokesperson for the like-minded group of developing countries and coordinator for the G77 and China for the historic Paris Agreement in December 2015. Definitely a Malaysian we are extremely proud of. Ladies and gentlemen, we all recognize we rely heavily on the telecommunications industry to learn, work, play, and of course communicate with each other. And these thought leaders are now going to share their suggestions as to how the industry can increase our climate resilience. I'm confident that with the excellent panelists we have with us, and with the usual thoughtful and discerning inputs we receive from the audience, we will have a rich exchange of ideas today. Thank you so much, and over to you, Dr. Gary.
Thank you so much, Sunita, for your kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here and to have these 6 gentlemen with us this evening is an extremely rare event, and I'm very, very certain that at the end of this event you'll find that you know far more about the telecommunications industry than you came in knowing. Ladies and gentlemen, just some housekeeping before we begin. If any of you in the audience have any questions, do feel free to type them in the chat box. These questions will be captured and transmitted to me, and I will, where possible, pose them to one or more of the CEOs that we have here this evening. Broadly, the roundtable this evening is divided into 3 parts, 3 themes. You might think of them as. The first is how the telecommunications industry intends to reduce its emissions from its own operations. And taking the lead in this thematic area are our first 2 CEOs, Celcom Axiata's Idham Nawawi, as well as TM's Imri Mokhtar. We will go through each of these and we'll give them the floor for 5 minutes to talk about the measures that they're implementing within their organizations to reduce emissions and to strengthen resilience in the face of the physical risks from climate change. We'll then change gears a little bit and go into the second thematic area, and this is by far a much wider area. It's essentially the area of how the telecommunications industry can help the public as well as the private sector and businesses to make wiser choices with respect to energy efficiency, with respect to living a lower emissions lifestyle and becoming more and more sustainable. In this area, I will solicit the help of Digi's own Mr. Albern Murty, as well as Maxis's Gökhan Öǧüt, and Mr. Wong of U-Mobile. And once again, I will ask them to speak briefly for 5 minutes on these issues, and then we'll move on to the third and final theme. The third theme is in some ways the most interesting because it actually deals with the role that telecommunications plays in the face of extreme weather events, sometimes with respect to early warning, in other occasions in the aftermath of some of these extreme weather events, where minutes and seconds become vital to the survival of individuals and communities. And in many cases, the rebuilding process also is very much driven by the ability to communicate. So let's get started without any delay. And now I'll introduce the first CEO in the first thematic area, reducing emissions from the operations of the telecommunications industry. Our first CEO this evening is Mr. Idham Nawawi. He was appointed CEO of Celcom Axiata in September of 2018. He has over 23 years of experience in the telecommunications and IT industry. Before joining Celcom, he was the Group Chief Corporate Officer of Axiata Berhad, responsible for group regulatory management, corporate communications, corporate affairs, and government relations, and the Axiata Group Program and Governance Office. Prior to joining Axiata, he served as Chief Operating Officer of Packet One Networks in Malaysia, as Head of Strategy and Corporate Affairs for Axis Communications in Indonesia, and in various senior management positions for Maxis in Malaysia. He started his career, interestingly, as an engineer for Carl Zeiss in Princeton, New Jersey, in USA, before venturing into ICT with IBM. Mr. Nawawi is a Chevening Scholar, and he holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Rochester, New York, and an MBA from the University of Strathclyde, Glasgow in Scotland. Mr. Idham, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gary. I'm sorry I have to make you, or they made you read such a long introduction of myself. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting. I'm very pleased, actually, to be here. I hope you all can hear me well. It's definitely a very important topic. It's very, very close to my heart, this sustainability, renewable energy. And just for this session, I'm changing my background I don't know whether you all can see the background I'm using today is more of my solar panels on top of my house, because personally I embarked on this journey to use more of a renewable energy and to reduce what in a way what you spend and you pay to Tenaga Nasional. But I'm pleased, like, after I embark on this personal journey, while I save more than half of what I normally use in terms of electricity. So it's something good. So now we are looking at very, very closely now on where it really matters, where we really use a lot of energy, etc., so on and so forth, in powering up our network. I think the video that we saw from GSMA is quite clear, the impact of the networks that we have globally. And I think I truly believe what GSMA is trying to achieve is a net zero carbon by 2050 is very, very bold. I guess we need that kind of bold direction. Celcom, as you know, is part of the Axiata group, and we embrace this net zero carbon by 2050. And we do even set ourselves midway target by 2030 in how do we bring down 55% of our current carbon emission. If you look at that, 2030 at one point in time seems so far away, but it is actually, to me, in this day and age, it is a very, very short runway if you think about what we need to achieve to bring down by 55%. It requires, of course, not just awareness, it requires commitment, really rigorous measurement, and really, really real measurable initiatives that we need to execute and execute and execute. Of course, as a group, Axiata, we started this a bit earlier as well. I think you've seen also in the video with E.co, which is one of our subsidiaries as the tower company, to reduce at that point in time 30% of the carbon emission from our towers within 4 years, which I believe they have overachieved. But with the current program that we do, it is a lot more structured, a lot more holistic, which we're going to ask every single OpCo within the group to commit. And Celcom in Malaysia is one of those operating companies that is actually embracing this challenge from our group, from the GSMA, but not just because of that challenge, but it's also because of our own responsibility. It opened up, personally, my eyes. Before this, most of us, the networks has been around for a long time. Celcom, for example, for the last 33 years. But however, it never really occurred to us how much power, how much carbon have we actually produced to power up the network that we operate. And similarly, how much does our customers, when they charge their phones, when they use the network, how much the carbon are they actually contributing to the GSG? So this really opened up our eyes. So to me personally, I started looking into this, get the team to really measure. I think now we've got some kind of rough estimate. I'm not sure whether our numbers is roughly the same as the rest, but we're using our 2020 as a baseline. We're seeing in our rough calculation, our estimate is we're probably producing around 250 kilotons of CO2 every year. I asked the team, how much does that mean? What does that mean? I cannot measure this CO2. I asked the team, so how much does one tree can absorb the CO2? And the answer that came back was one tree can absorb about 1 ton of CO2 over 40 years lifetime. So that means just to absorb the CO2 that we produce on the network, if we don't do anything else, we need about 10 million trees to be planted. I don't think we have enough land space to cover that in Klang Valley, right? So that's, if you're trying to visualize how big it is. So that's something that we're doing. So there's a lot of things that we are doing now, structurally inside the company on the network side. One is, of course, we look at the network that's currently, we look at from all scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, how much we are using, etc., so on and so forth. We still have sites that's quite remote, that's being powered by diesel. I think almost 8 to 10% of our sites still not on grid, it's still off grid. So we're looking at that. We are introducing a hybrid sites, the hybrid sites, even though it's more expensive, it's about 50%, 60% more expensive than the normal gen set. However, it produces about half of the CO2, right? So over the long term, is the 3 to 6 years, and also it's also cost less to operate in a way. So we are starting to look at that. That's how do you reduce in terms of the off-grid kind of sites that are actually producing a lot of the CO2. We then starting to look at into introducing some of those features that's on the network. I'm sure my colleagues there is doing the same thing. Like how do you look at the air conditioning? How do you look at the single RAN? How do you look at the sleep mode, and so on and so forth, right? And fiberization is another important initiative that we're doing. I mean, by using fiber as a transmission, you produce less CO2 than using microwave, for example, because you're using less power. So a lot of this that we are doing. But you imagine all this, in a way, will help to reduce, and then whatever that we cannot reduce, or we have to compensate with still a lot of trees or other methods, right? Still a lot of trees to be planted. But if I step back a little bit and look at beyond Celcom, it's one thing that we look at. Yeah, maybe these initiatives individually that we do will reduce, maybe incrementally, yeah. But it's not groundbreaking kind of reduction, because we still have 4, 5, 6 networks in Malaysia, right? Yep. So you imagine if I were producing about 250 kiloton of CO2, and you imagine some of the other network producing maybe almost the same or maybe slightly less. So you can imagine how much we as a country is producing just from the networks alone. And then we are not talking about how much does the devices, the users, and the rest. So this is one of the real challenge, because one of the things that we do, yes, individually we can do something, but I believe as an industry, that's something we need to look at even closer. Right? For example, making sure, we are sharing, but I think maybe we should need to be a lot more aggressive in terms of sharing everything that we do on the infrastructure, whatever that we can do to use less power. Even consolidations of networks possibly would save a lot in terms of the utilization of electricity and so on and so forth, right?
Idham, I'm going to have to ask you to hold that thought, if that's all right. And we'll come back around to this when we have the discussion. Yeah, but I think we need to stay on time, so with your permission.
Okay, all right. So, all right. I'll pause here, yeah.
Yes, thank you. So let's move on to our second CEO in this first area, reducing emissions from operations. Is Mr. Imri Mokhtar from Telekom Malaysia. His last position was as Chief Operations Officer at Celcom Axiata, as a matter of fact.
Hi, Imri.
That was my boss.
You never know, he will become my boss later.
Anyway, previously he served as TM's Chief Operating Officer, and prior to that, he was Executive Vice President of Unified. He started his career with TM in 1996 and rejoined TM again in 2005, serving in various positions in TM, including as Vice President in the Program for Performance Management Office, and also for Consumer Affairs. Prior to joining TM in 2005, Imri was with a pay TV operator in Malaysia, and before that, a consultant with a global management consulting firm. Mr. Imri Mokhtar graduated from University College in London with a Bachelor of Electronics Engineering with Management Studies, first class honours, by the way, and completed business and leadership programs by Cambridge Judge Business School and Harvard Business School. So, Mr. Imri Mokhtar, you have 5 minutes to talk about the measures that TM is undertaking to reduce emissions from its operations. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Gary, and everyone for having me here. I'll try to keep this brief. And one thing I'm happy to share with everyone is that, at TM today and moving forward, environment, under the ESG agenda, is a more prominent agenda and a priority at TM, at the board level as well as at the management. So just wish to share with everyone, it's reaching the end of the year, and this is when we do our 3-year cycle or strategic blueprint, right? And this year, what will be different at TM is that we will be also incorporating our ESG plan, and a big chapter of that is going to be on environment, on the improving, clearly looking at where we are today, the baseline of the usage of the consumption of within TM, and based on 2020 usage of the consumption, it's about 600 gigawatt hours, right? And I understand that could be about nearly 3 times more than what a telco, right? A mobile telco would use. And that's because the network that TM runs to serve the various customers in Malaysia, home SMEs, the enterprise, public sector, and so forth, right? It covers the fixed network, there's also a mobile network. There's also the data center. So I guess with that sort of infrastructure, it is a bit more than a mobile network. And moving forward in our plans to reduce that consumption, clearly today in the fixed network we have fiber as well as the old legacy copper network. We are planning over the next few years, within the next 5 to 7 years, of shutting down that copper network. So that there'll be lesser consumption of that fixed network, which requires us migrating the customers on that network. And next on the mobile network, today we have some network on our own, and some of it, we do partner with some of you here in the call. And it's interesting, Idham had mentioned just now, right? Today we have multiple mobile networks, but as we know, our country for 5G, we're moving towards a single network. So that would further optimize the network infrastructure for within the industry. And certainly the core network for TM is the fiber network, and we have started to invest and implement various energy management and efficiency systems, and also in our procurement exercise today, as we do the assessment and the rating and so forth, right? Solutions of vendors with a much more green solution, would get those extra points, right? In our assessment. So that's one part, how TM plans to reduce the consumption, the energy consumption from the network. Secondly, with regards to the office buildings, some of you, as you drive past the Federal Highway in KL, right, you'll see we are occupying the Menara TM today. Come 2023, early 2023, we will be moving out from this 55 floors of building to a much more space efficient office, much more campus style in Cyberjaya. And also in terms of the workforce arrangement, coming from out from this pandemic into the endemic phase, but the work style of the TM team members would need to change as well. We are committed to adopt a 60-40 work arrangement. 60% in terms of working from home, 40% in the office, and that would help in some ways in terms of reducing more transports or more vehicles on the road. So that's the commitment we've made to the workforce, and to serve our customers as we go and install broadband services. In terms of repairs, the occasional repairs that needs to be done. There's a lot of the TM vehicles, and we are optimizing that. And we are exploring various ways, various programs in terms of how can we move towards electric vehicle, right? There's some proposal that's kind of landed on my table that we're exploring, and I'm sure the rest of my colleagues are exploring as well. And of course, one of the things as well that we are looking at is on the supply, right? Today, a lot of that 600 gigawatt hours is from the brown energy, right? And we are exploring the much more greener, the renewables from solar or hydro. There's a slight premium to that, right? Today, but we believe moving forward, whatever that we could save if we optimize the usage from the network, could potentially fund whatever the slight premium that we need to pay for the much more greener power. So that's how we're thinking about it moving forward.
Thank you so much, Mr. Imri. I'm sure that the audience will also want to know what kind of energy savings that they will be able to realize, the industry will be able to realize from moving to 5G. And when we get to the roundtable discussion, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interest in that. So thank you so much. Moving on to our third, moving on first of all into the second thematic area, which once again is how the telecommunications industry is helping the consumers and businesses to make the right choices. The first CEO speaking this evening is Mr. Albern Murty. Albern was appointed CEO in April of 2015. Prior to that, he was a Chief Operating Officer for Digi Telecommunications. And since joining Digi Telecommunications in 2002, he has held roles in project planning and controls, product management, product development, and as head of strategy and new business, acting co-chief marketing officer, chief marketing officer. And in fact, before DG, his previous experiences include business and commercial management roles in Lucent Technologies across the Asian region. Albern holds a Bachelor of Science in Marketing and Advertising Management from Portland State University in Oregon, USA. Albern, for 5 minutes, would you tell us how you believe that Digi will be able to help consumers and businesses reduce their emissions?
Yeah, Dr. Gary, thank you. First of all, thanks for having us on. It's good to be on part of this panel. I would have asked you to cut short the introduction, Dr. Gary. We probably wasted some time there, but thank you anyway. Just on customers and on this, so let me just start with Telenor and Digi a little bit. So like the others, both Imri and Idham, there is an ambition of the company from a company-wide position to look at how we contribute to Malaysia achieving its net zero by 2050. There is, of course, an expectation from both Digi and Telenor that we would halve our footprint today by 2030, and at least then work towards that. But the truth is, you still have a gap, So while you put all those initiatives that you want to change gensets to grid, you want to have solar equation, you want to reduce and use modern air conditioning systems in the premises, you want to use less space, more efficient solutions for employees to work. And there is still a gap in terms of how do you actually transform. Idham touched on some interesting things on the network side that you can work together. Imri talked about our own footprint in terms of how we actually run those premises and offices. But there's also a big equation among all of us, among the 6 of us. We have 30 plus million Malaysians using our services. And there, I think we have a role in terms of modernizing the way Malaysians use technology and how they use technology to actually reach these ambitions for the country by 2050. So one is on us. We need to modernize. We need to continue to push that changes that we do. And then the other one is what role do we play for consumers? And to your point. So let me give you a couple of things, and then I'll hand over to Gökhan and HT, who will come next on this as well. But I think there are lots of things that is being brought by innovation and connectivity. If you think about the possibilities of smart cities, all the way down to using AI in terms of how people will use AI to organize things that they do in their house, optimize their own utilization through giving them better information of what sort of energy are they using, how can they actually recycle more, how can they actually be much more careful in terms of what they use. One is about having information ready on their phones, and the other one is then introducing digital technology to them that they can then improve their lives and become much more efficient in terms of how the power and the utilities that they use. There is, of course, also a lot of things that we talk about, Internet of Things. There will be modern solutions coming to these consumers so that they can then change. But one thing that Digi we're trying to push is also the Yellow Heart brand, and we believe that consumers will choose brands that make a stand and introduce more products that will actually, one, enable them to feel empowered to make these better decisions. Two, we'll also want to be associated with brands that have a bigger purpose than just providing connectivity or providing any service that they do. And I think that's when you will see that shift. When it comes to consumers being aware, before I hand over, I think we also have a role in terms of making sure that today, we run a survey on our brand health, and you can see that there's about 40% of people that don't know what ESG is. And that's probably 60% when you look at it from a whole country perspective. We have a role to make sure that consumers understand that, and consumers are getting in the right information through the right channels. And I think we can bridge that for sure, Dr. Gary. I'll stop there and hand it over back to you to keep the flow.
Thank you so much, Albern. Next up, of course, we have from Maxis, Mr. Gökhan Öǧüt. Prior to becoming CEO, he was running his own consultancy firm, Erin Consultancy, specializing in management and marketing consultancies. Gökhan was previously the CEO of Vodafone Turkey, a position he held up and until October of 2016. He's worked as the Chief Marketing Officer for Vodafone Turkey from 2009 to 2011, and as Chief Consumer Business Unit Officer between October 2011 and October 2013. He joined Vodafone Turkey from Nutricia, medical nutrition company, where he was a general manager between 2008, after holding various local and global marketing directorate roles in Danone Turkey and Group Danone headquarters in France from 2001 to 2008. Gökhan has an industrial engineering degree from Boğaziçi University of Turkey, as well as an MBA from the University of Illinois at Chicago. Gökhan, the floor is yours.
Gökhan, you're mute.
Might be muted.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary. Once again, sorry about the long introduction, but it's becoming the thing of the telcos, I guess. So I would like to start by saying thank you. Thank you to Dr. Gary, yourself, to Climate Governance Malaysia, CEO Action Network for inviting us and organizing this call with us. It is also our pleasure. As an industry, we tend to work together quite well, and this is one of the areas that we are committed to work together to really help Malaysia to achieve its goals on this very important topic. As Maxis, all our employees, management, including board, we see the climate change as one of the most challenging issues that humankind are facing these days. And we are committed to do our part in the fight against this climate change. And we believe we are in a unique position, both as Maxis and most importantly as industry. And the part of the question that you have, how we can really are helping our consumers, the people of Malaysia, in terms of raising awareness and helping them to reduce their carbon emissions. Once again, we are in a unique situation. For three reasons. One, we are in a very high involvement category. Our telecommunications industry, to Albern's point, it covers all Malaysians, starting from small ages all the way up to senior citizens. And our involvement is every single day, 24 hours a day, our involvement and our relationship with our customers. And this gives us an opportunity to talk to them and to create this awareness. As industry, we started with e-bill many years ago, our efforts, as you would all remember, because we are one of the companies and industries that create the most bills, I guess. And our digitalization lately have been also efforts to help our customers reduce their carbon emission by e-reloads, for example, that's e-bill moved to prepaid. Our call center operations moving to more and more digital and self-help, so that reducing the need to go to the stores, reducing the travel of our people going to homes, really focusing on reducing the travel by moving to more digital and self-serve mode. As well as we have common industry initiatives together with MCMC. E-waste is one initiative that we try to help the Malaysians to reduce their e-waste, as well as the latest one, My Baikati initiative, that collecting old ICT equipment really helps reduce the carbon emission and helps the environment. Second, in a unique position, we're not only serving millions of customers, at the same time we are serving enterprise customers, government agencies, as well as small SMEs. We have many customers whom we are helping them to digitalize their businesses and thus helping their customers to reduce their carbon emission. So again, this puts a lot of responsibility on our shoulders to continue to play an important role in Malaysian government's My Digital initiative, digitalizing the country, digitalizing the economy, and this really is helping the climate and global warming issue, the fight against global warming issue. And the last one I see is 5G. This digitalization, this helping other industries and the customers in the end to reduce carbon emission will only accelerate with 5G. Higher bandwidth, faster and real-time connectivity on the move will really help all of us, all the industries, starting with the industries and governments, smart city, smart agriculture, and autonomous cars. What is waiting ahead of us is just going to help more and more all the industries and our customers at the end of the day to reduce their emission, and will again continue to play an important role as industry together with the advancement of 5G. Now I would like to leave the floor back to you, Gary. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gökhan, for keeping very, very good time. And this brings us to the third speaker in the second theme, Mr. Wong Heang. I understand that among you he goes by the initials HT. Mr. Wong was officially appointed CEO of U-Mobile in April of 2014. He has more than 2 decades of experience in finance, business, and corporate development. Prior to joining U-Mobile, he was CFO for WBL Corporation Limited, a multinational conglomerate listed on the stock exchange in Singapore. He was also the CFO of KS Energy Limited in Singapore and of the Telco PT Indosat in Indonesia. Before that, Mr. Wong held senior positions in various companies. In the 10 years he was attached to Keppel Corporation in Singapore. He holds an MBA from Imperial College in London and a Bachelor of Engineering, once again first-class honours in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Manchester. Mr. Wong, for the next 5 minutes, we'd like to hear what you and U-Mobile might be able to push in the future to your customers to help them reduce their emissions.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Dr. Gary, for that fantastic introduction. Being one of the last speakers in this roundtable, I think all my, the rest of the big CEOs have already, covered most of the points. Okay, but I think one of the things that I like to bring up is that we are in the communication industry. Okay, I think we do play a very important part in terms of educating the public in terms of the importance of climate change, importance of reducing carbon and emission. And one of the things that we do we do have a lot is handsets, I would say. Okay, so every year I think we go through in Malaysia about 10 to 12 million of new handsets. If you because the handsets go through a life cycle about 3 years, 2 to 3 years. So in terms of that, I think what we can do is I think the 6 telcos here have the leverage in terms of pressurizing the manufacturers in terms of putting on the so-called when they buy a phone, okay, the consumer should be should know what they are buying in terms of the carbon emission of the phone, the batteries, and also perhaps what we can do as an industry, like what Gökhan has touched upon, to come up with an industry-wide e-waste program. Okay, because because the phones go through that life cycle, and I think it's important for us to treat that e-waste much more properly in that sense. Okay, I think apart from that, 5G, AI, IoT, I think that presents new set of opportunities, for us to use, I would say, energy more efficiently per se. Okay, so I think that's all I have for the audience here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wong.
Thank you.
And once again, apologies, but somebody has to go last.
No, it's fine.
You raised some very interesting points. I'm sure we'll talk about extended producer responsibility. I just changed my phone, and the previous phone I actually had for more than 6 years. It was 8 model numbers behind. But I actually used it with a lot of pride, until it really began bogging down and became unusable with too many apps. But that's an area that is poses a significant problem for the environment as well. We'll move on to the third thematic area, and once again, this is the area where we're talking about what message you wish to send to policymakers regarding having effective communication during times of crisis, both in terms of being able to prevent crisis from being more serious by virtue of early warning, as well as in the aftermath of crises to minimize the loss and damage and loss of life and human suffering. So our last CEO this evening is Afzal Abdul Rahim. He began his career in the automotive sector, assuming a regional role with the British sports and racing car maker Group Lotus.
Gary, this is so embarrassing, Gary.
Okay,
I'll just cut it there and I'll just jump in if you don't mind. I'm so embarrassed because I was an academic failure next to the first class guys here. Bearing in mind they're all multiple times our size, I feel completely inadequate, Gary.
Anyway, but I think it's very important that he actually established international bandwidth firm Global Transit in 2005. I think it's extremely relevant, which today counts the Unity Trans-Pacific Cable System and the Asia-Pacific Gateway APG among its core investments. And by the way, you also founded the Malaysian Internet Exchange, or MAIAX, which was established in 2000. Anyway, Afzal also holds a degree in mechanical engineering with electronics from the University of Sussex in the UK. So I
graduated with the second lower, just to be very clear where we are. So far away from the first class.
Dr. Gary just ignored you, Afzal. He's just continuing with your introduction.
Anyway,
yeah. So please, the floor is yours.
No, absolutely. Thank you. So, assalamu alaikum and good evening, everyone. Thank you for that. Listen, I mean, several very experienced and very able colleagues have gone before me. I actually want to kind of rustle things up a bit, and I think that whilst as an industry we're doing some very, very good things, I don't think we're doing enough. Right? Fundamentally, I think we need to understand the flow of how energy is consumed and what moves the lever. Amongst my esteemed colleagues today, I think, I remember when D House Albern was first built in 2007-ish, around that time. D House was the building before you, and you forgot to turn off the lights, but was really the most energy efficient telco campus that was built. So Digi, with its affiliation to Telenor, etc., has taken the lead from the very beginning insofar as looking at clean energy and making sure that we're efficient. That's in the optimization bucket, right? I want to put my hand up and say that amongst the people today, on a employee per kilowatt or a revenue per kilowatt standpoint, just to be clear, every single company in this room is 4 or 5 times the size of Time.com. We are the biggest polluters, right? So Time, having as much data center space as we do, per footprint, we are, I put up my hand and admit that we are the biggest polluters, right? And we're the biggest polluters because we host high capacity data centers. And I've been involved in data centers for the past 21 years of my life, right? And in building data centers, we talk in kilowatts and megawatts, et cetera, et cetera. And just to give you an idea, Dr. Gary, of where we are today, I mean, Singapore imposed a data center moratorium on the build of massive data centers about 18 months ago, because data centers there are consuming 8 to 9% of the national grid. In Malaysia today, our power demand is 22, 24. I think our power capacity, correct me if I'm wrong, is the low 20,000 megawatts. I think about 23,000 megawatts. And the estimates that we look at, like every single business financial paper talks about building more and more hyperscale data centers, right? Part of that demand comes because the Singaporeans have chopped off supply there. We're going to be 12, 13, 15% of the grid perhaps in the next 7 years. Imagine 15% of the grid is powering, right, servers predominantly, who all they do is convert electricity to heat. As you know, the thermal efficiency of a semiconductor, particularly a high capacitor semiconductor series like what you see in servers, they have a horrible thermal efficiency, right? So what we're doing is that we're based in a tropical country. In a tropical country, we need to move this heat out. We need to vent this heat outside, right? And then at the end of the day, we also need to cool air to basically supply cooling back to these servers again. So we talk in terms of power usage efficiency in the data center world. The truth is that for every 1 kilowatt of power that we consume, we need about 1.3 kilowatts to basically cool the room and to keep the servers running. And this is a massive issue. Not just that, but because data centers, basically, we think about the macro picture in terms of power transmission, data centers don't distribute very, very well. So when we set up new facilities, I mean, TM has got a beautiful new facility in Cyberjaya, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Imri, when you're done, is probably about 40 to 50 megawatts in terms of load, right? IT capacity, about 25, 40, 50. Ours is slightly smaller, but we're still in the same range. We are putting significant demand onto the grid. And the truth is that governments and power generation companies, etc., cannot keep up because they can't think about where to plan these things. Even the more advanced countries that have got things going still are unable to figure out what to do, right? But the truth is that when we come to the reason why we need so many servers, right? There's a lot of things that we can do. There's vested interest in wanting to sell more availability, more reliability, etc., etc. But we need to ask ourselves as a country: what is the overall benefit of pulling in hyperscale investors into Malaysia? Of course, we want the large OTTs to invest in Malaysia and set up data centers, but will we come to the realization, like Singapore, like our brothers down south, right, who have realized that actually the tangible economic benefit, right, is actually outweighed by the climate impact? And whilst we talk about what us telcos can do insofar as our switching, our buildings, and all the very necessary stuff that we're doing, the elephant in the room is the amount of power that basically servers consume. We can argue that because we have servers, we can have Teams and Zoom, and therefore we're not going to put out more nitrous oxide as we start our high-performance cars and drive them across the place, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, fundamentally, we still need to cater for this new type of energy monster, and that is servers and data centers. So where does the solution lie? The solution lies in two parts. First of all, is that if consumers, and this is going to sound like a horrible thing to say, if consumers didn't expect such high standards of search returns and having the entire Netflix directory at your footprint or anything like that, what we would find is that we would then be able to reduce the idle capacity of servers and reduce the peak capacity of servers. But we can't. We want to click on a movie, we want to watch it quickly. If it buffers, we're not happy. We want content there and there. So because we've gotten used and addicted to the instantaneousness of content being aware, servers need to do a lot more, and therefore we are over providing processing and storage per individual. If you think about it, we store ridiculous amounts of useless WhatsApp images on our phones, but we forget that every night that needs to be uploaded to the cloud. Albern's laughing because he's got all sorts of images on his phone of green lungs and trees and all the climate friendly stuff. But the point I'm trying to say is that for that reason, as consumers, that actually moves the needle. What we can do as an industry, in the beautiful video that GSMA put out, is a fraction of what can be done if we change the mindset of consumer behavior in expecting things instantaneously. First point. Second point, actually this depends on physicists. We can't run away on our dependence from silica and semiconductors. We simply cannot. Right from the time of the vacuum tube moving over there, we have and semiconductors are horribly thermally efficient. And until we find a breakthrough insofar as GaN or graphene or boron arsenide or any of these new compounds that are basically happening, it's the physicists that are going to be able to take 5, 10, 15% or even 20% in terms of capacity of the grid, because more and more servers are going to be built, more and more servers are going to be hosted, etc., etc., etc. Sometimes I feel a bit frustrated that as a global community, it's not just the telcos, but the data center operators, the server manufacturers, the academia, we haven't gotten together to put up a hand and say the worst energy monster that the world is growing today right in front of our faces are data centers and servers. But they offset certain amounts of energy that we save, and we haven't addressed that. Now, until we can address that in a meaningful way, I feel like as if it's about me as an overweight person jumping up and down because I lose 500 grams in calorie count when really I need to lose 40 kilos.
Thank you, Ms. Afzal. I'm going to have to stop you there because I think we can turn this back around right away and get into the discussion. And let me use what you've begun there and talk a little bit about perhaps, so we've got 5G coming in, and 5G promises to be very fast, but of course 5G as a communications platform has to work with all these data centers. Is there among the regulators of this industry in Malaysia, is there a message that we can send to the regulators vis-a-vis, where the balance should be? On the one hand, we've got 5G using less energy to move, more information around, and yet at the same time, you talked about this luxury consumption, perhaps that we've gotten used to. Maybe we can think about this in terms of having something like our in terms of electricity generation, having a surplus capacity and the reserve capacity, and that doesn't necessarily have to be there for us to attract the kinds of investment. So perhaps we can open that up. Anyone else like take the floor on that?
Yeah, Dr. Gary, Imri here. Afzal, I'd just like to follow through from your point, right? It's fair that as our country move into a much more digital landscape, right? More and more data centers will be needed, right? And certainly a lot more of consumption would be driven by that. And I absolutely agree with you that as an individual, right, we could change some of our habits, our expectations, to help, right? As you said, in terms of the WhatsApp backups and all that, right, which consumes that processing and so forth at the cloud. But I see it as one part of that consumption increases from the data center. This is where us collectively as an industry should look at other areas that we could reduce it, so that the net increase, or the net of it will be a net decrease rather than a net increase. So hence, what each and every one of us had discussed just now that we could do is really, really imperative, right? That we execute it and implement it, right? In terms of optimizing our network operations, how we run the business and so forth, right? So I think it needs to be considered holistically in that manner. Thank you.
No, right. I mean, I think Imri is absolutely right. There's a lot that we can do to reduce or to sort of stop the balance from going out of whack, right? And these are and that's why I said I think that as an industry, I think the telcos, and not to give ourselves too much of a pat in the back, we've done a lot. Well, first of all, you can probably tell, Gary, that we all work very closely with each other. I think we're a very unique industry in that we tend to be friends. We're all frenemies, right? And so kind of as a result, some of us get ostracized and left alone, but generally speaking, we get along quite well with each other. And what I wanted to say is that as a result, we're able to have these kinds of conversations openly, with or without, whether we are kind of on a round table. So Imri's point is very, very astute. There's more that we can do to bring down consumption. I think the macro level question in your question about 5G is as follows. There is a fundamental difference between spectral efficiency, how much through a digital signal processor, through DSP, you can squeeze through in terms of megabits per second, and thermal efficiency. And they don't always go hand in hand. If you look at a lift drag curve of an aircraft, you've got parasitic drag, you've got induced drag, and you've got other sorts of drag, right? In this case, it's a similar thing. There's an optimum point on this curve, right? And in order to power 5G, to make it more spectrally efficient, we're moving away from hardware-based switching to software-based switching. Software-based switching means more semiconductors, which means more heat. So at the end of the day, are we going to get more kilowatts per megabit per second consumption? The answer is that's probably not going to go down, because we are on a point on the curve that's probably going to make it worse. I think Heang has quite a lot of experience in working on this. So perhaps HT, you would like to jump in.
Thanks a lot, Afzal. Thanks a lot. Well, I think Afzal is correct. You know, going to 5G doesn't mean that it's lower consumption. So I think ultimately we need to look at end to end. It's not just us alone, okay, but it's the equipment that we buy. Okay, you know, how can we leverage onto the manufacturers, you know, the servers, you know, even for data centers, the servers, okay, whether is it power from the grid or whether we can, you know, do some, you know, renewable energy, for example, like solar, you know, to at least, you know, to compensate, you know, some of the carbon emission through the traditional power generation. Okay, so I think it's you know, we can do whatever we can. I think there's so much that we can do, but we need to leverage the industry strength onto the manufacturer themselves.
Yeah, one of the things that has come up very often in this series of roundtables is that as we go through all the Sustainable Development Goals, we always end up at the last one, number 17, which is about partnership. And I think that the group here this evening, assembled here this evening, is an amazing assemblage in that sense, that you're all providing sort of the same thing, and you know, according to any business school, you should be in, you know, neck and neck competition with each other, and yet you know, you've formed a sort of symbiotic relationship that actually is synergistic in many ways. And so how could we expand this to the people you deal with the most, the government service, you know, the private sector service? Yeah, how do you begin this push out? And that's tied to a question which we've received. What policy recommendations would you like to see that would make it easier to be sustainable and more climate resilient? And if you wouldn't mind looking at that from that standpoint, so perhaps what are the associated businesses and industries that you deal with where you would find the greatest potential for emissions reduction, power consumption? Yes. Who would like to take that?
If I may, Dr.
Albern,
Gary,
yeah,
if I
please,
may,
yeah.
Two responses to you. We actually discussed this among ourselves. How come this industry is so cooperative, working with each other? It's not a miracle, actually. There is so much competition among us that we have to work together. It sounds like an oxymoron, but that's how it's actually coming to life. So the first policy recommendation that I would have is government should continue to spur competition, because competition can really make innovation come through, as well as cooperation, so that the whole industry. One.
Gökhan, we seem to be losing you. We lost your last sentence, probably.
I'm not in Malaysia and on Maxis network. That's why you're losing me. So
I'm on the Maxis network, which is why it's working perfectly.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, but we take your point, and that's a very good one. Would anyone else like to build on that?
If maybe I just add on to what Gökhan was saying, because yeah, we were competing, but also we are close partnership in certain areas in the back to improve our cost efficiency, etc. I think has been a very good practice, and also touching back on the 5G, right? So we try to maintain the competition, but it's very important if the 5G is not going to increase so much impact on the additional power utilization, that it actually maximize the utilization of existing infrastructure that we already have, so it does not create another level of power. So as what we have been doing in the industry, sharing of the towers, sharing of where we can tap on each other's power, sharing of the transmission, and so on and so forth, right? So we don't create a new one. So we ride on that. So how do we ride on this existing infrastructure that we have, so we don't create another level of GHG? Yeah? That's just one of the thought that I have.
Yeah, Dr. Gary, I'd just like to, sorry.
And go ahead, please.
Yeah, so just like to jump. I think with regards to this collaboration, in terms of providing what's best for the country, I think amongst the six of us, we've already done that, right? We've committed collectively in providing better connectivity, whether it's via fiber broadband or whether it's via 4G under the Jendela blueprint, right? That's the blueprint to provide better coverage as well as quality to the rakyat. And I guess one thing that we could follow through from that, right? I'm speaking to all my colleagues, good gentlemen here, is that to collaborate as well on how we could make that impact, right, on this managing this environmental climate better, right? The sharing of best practices, as I mentioned just now, TM today we've got these three big guzzlers of energy. Is the fixed network, there's the mobile, and then there's some data centers. So whatever learnings or best practices from the bigger mobile operators, we'll be more than happy. We could learn from that. And Afzal, on time, is it being any of the best practice, any good things that you guys are doing in terms of any efficiency, right? We'd be more than happy to learn from time.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And also with the data center as well. And I think what I'm trying to promote here is that closer collaboration on this agenda, right? That's important for the country and for the world, right? I think that's one. And on policy, Dr. Gary, I think one of the things, as I'm just going to share here, when we have this conversation at the board, right? Some of the questions that's being posed is that the investment that will be needed, right? Yep. And hence that got me thinking as well. The government once upon a time, as they were trying to encourage investment, technology investment by the telcos, there were investment tax allowances or some sort of relief, right? So that mobile or fixed, we would pump in our capex and invest, right? So probably a policy that would encourage investment into green technology, that's green related, right? I think that would be useful for us as well. Granted, we will try to fund any of those investment through the savings, right, by optimizing the network and so forth. But some sort of incentive and support by the government, I think, would be very much welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. May I push you a little bit, gentlemen, into some areas perhaps that might fall into maybe scope 2 of your emissions? I understand that some of you may be doing some self-generation using solar PV or some other sources, but have you given any thought to thinking about the grid itself?
Yeah.
And how to decarbonize the grid? Any ideas there?
Yeah. Do you guys mind if I take this one? I just want to echo what Imri said about us, kind of working together, right? Because the telco industry is one of the few industries where the CEOs meet at least twice a month, at least, because the chairman of our regulator sits down and kicks our behind on a Wednesday every other week to make sure that we implement Jendela and roll out infrastructure. So we coordinate the rollout of infrastructure, we talk about complaints with each other, and it will be really easy for us to put a carbon agenda on the table as well, right? So if any industry is ripe for cooperation on that, is there. To answer your question about whether we've thought about generating our own power, I think the first question we need to answer is that can it be cleaner than what's being generated by the infrastructure provider, right? So we know, and Gary, you have to forgive me because my data is out, but I believe we're still sort of 40% coal, 40% gas turbine, 20% hydro, something like that. Yeah,
slightly higher on the gas, but yeah.
Slightly higher on the gas. Okay. So there's benefits. So there's benefits and drawbacks of gas turbines, as you know, right? I mean, they are wonderfully stable devices, but they're also wonderfully sensitive devices, and therefore the transmission grid needs to be over-designed in order to accommodate any changes in amplitude or frequency to protect them, right? So when we think about for example, there's no coincidence. We haven't actually admitted this. So we'll admit this for the first time online. TM and us, our data centers in Cyberjaya, our brand new data centers, are literally 150 meters away from each other, right? And one of the reasons why they're both in this area is because they're both next to, or quite far away enough not to be a hazard, but near enough to tap in future of a Gas Malaysia pipeline, right? And that's a pipeline which supplies KLPP and the gas turbine sitting in around Sepang and in Serdang as well. And so we have designs for us to go and do so. But in order for us, if you look at the economic case of either doing a cogen or a trigen situation, because don't forget, we also dump a lot of heat that we could turn into steam to generate stuff as well. Perhaps not at the present level of the kind of envelope, but we can try and do something. You and I spoke about it briefly the other day. And the fundamental issue is that there isn't enough impetus to go and do it. Because if you look at the economic case of basically building your own grid, the thing about data centers, which take up most of our power, is what Imri said, between fixed, mobile, and data centers, per net footprint, your data centers take up the most kind of power. They're very stable. They produce the same amount, they require the same amount of power any time of day. You can argue that cooling goes down a little bit as you reach the slightly lower part of the adiabatic dry envelope, right? But at the end of the day, they probably produce the same amount of power. So we're not able to sell back at the grid when we don't use it. Quite different from manufacturing. I think this is a fundamental issue, like aluminum smelters, for example. They're very, very peaky, right? But data centers and networks are pretty stable. So you don't really have much difference between, in telco speak, EIR and CIR, or excess capacity to sort of average capacity. And because you don't have that, you don't have that ability to sell back to the grid.
Any other views on this?
Yeah, Gary, maybe a little bit more down to the site level. All the CEOs talked about converting site level from gensets to grid. And what happens here is, as you try to build out more coverage, there is a Jendela program that's now building out more coverage into rural Malaysia. Some of these areas don't have grid lines, right? And so you then put in gensets, and an option around looking at solar panels. It's a good option, but it's not able to take a 24 hours as some of the CEOs mentioned. So you will have sites which then lose connectivity for consumers. So there's some modernization that will come over time, we believe, right? So a joint sourcing on demand generating sourcing for better solar capability for sites could be an area for policies and for us to look at jointly. Because this might be an option on having much more cleaner way of powering up these sites, right? Afzal, you're going to add a comment.
Oh no!
Okay. Yeah, and I think that way consumers can stay connected, at a site level, with much more cleaner way of connectivity, right?
Yeah, just need to put a check on the time. We're at about 1/4 past the hour, and like to dedicate a bit of time actually to the second thematic area, because I think that's one of the areas that has the potential to greatly reduce consumer consumption of consumer emissions. I'd really like to know where you believe some of the highest potential for emissions reductions lies. Perhaps you might want to split it up in the residents, but perhaps more toward businesses, and perhaps issues like transportation, logistics. Where are some of the areas that you are maybe working on new products that you might want to be marketing? I know this is putting you on the spot and showing your hand. But I think that broadly speaking, some of the areas that you see have the greatest potential for emissions reductions, just by virtue of having the information that you need at your fingertips. Anyone?
Anyone want to go?
Yeah, I would say. I mean, I would go first by saying that really, it is probably. We are probably the last ones that should be designing apps and services layer for consumers. However, that will happen naturally, and I believe that consumers will be able to want to control their devices at home their lighting situation. They, as things become much more automated, some of the examples that were given using AI in the home, smart homes. Transportation is a big one. You touched on transportation, Dr. Gary. Transportation, knowing which routes to use. You've got apps out there today that enable you to find the best routes to drive through. That will be further enhanced in the next couple of years. And I think that's where connectivity will play a big part. So partnerships with apps and services that will control better utilization of electronic devices, gadgets, lighting, energy consumption activities. That's the role that I see us playing.
Yeah.
We can't do this in isolation, is my view, and neither will the manufacturers be able to do what we do. And I think that's where we need to come together and think about partnerships.
No, I think Albern is absolutely right. I mean, if you think about the fact that we live in an always-on world, right? So you go to sleep and your Wi-Fi routers are on. If you think about it, you go to sleep and you've only put your TV into kind of standby mode. And so this always-on world is creating a situation where, I mean, in a typical household of 5 or 6 people, there's probably 30, 40, 50 watts worth of power running unnecessarily, but you're not using it while you're asleep. But yet we want it to be there because we need all of our devices to be connected all the time. If you were to expand that argument, you would say that all the base stations need to be on between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. every night. But the consumers won't accept if it wasn't on. So I think this education is what Albern says needs to come from all sorts of things. So if you were to look simply today, between TM being the champion and Maxis number 2 and us a distant number 3 in home broadband, we probably have 3.5 million subscribers, right? There's 3.5 million homes who are running full-time Wi-Fi. And if each one is running 50 watts, you go do your math overnight, 30, 40, 50 watts overnight, you go do your math. Of course, one router only runs about, I think, 8 to 12 watts. But once you add the repeaters and everything, etc., it's a heck of a lot of power that's always on for when you don't use it. And this is this term idle consumer capacity is something we need to start pushing to people to make them conscious. Because if you look at all the consumer electronics, there isn't a function to power off when there's low demand. There isn't.
And I think as a beyond just the consumer, the residentials today, right? That is consuming that energy during idle usage time. Yeah, I think Gökhan earlier you had mentioned about industries as well, right? And here with the infrastructure that we have in the country, connectivity, whether it's fixed or mobile, with the IoTs and so forth, I think all of us are ready to support, a much more smarter industry, right? And guess this is where the Gary had asked, right? What is the ask, of our group, right? Of the government is to really promote, the various industries to embrace this. We saw earlier in the video from GSMA, right? How it had enable a much more smarter cities, smarter transportation, smart water solutions, and so forth. I think across all 6 of us, we are ready for that, right? In terms of connectivity and technology, but it requires the customers, right? Whether from the public or the private sector to step up with a similar ambition, right? To our readiness. I think that would really help our country.
Right, so I'll take it then that there shouldn't be any shortage of volunteers to begin a program to educate people on nighttime use of devices, etc.
Absolutely not. We have an industry spokesman, which I will not reveal, but there's one of us has been nominated as industry spokesman, and he will deal with it.
It falls into the same category in my mind as billboards. Billboard lighting between the hours of 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. Yeah, particularly now the LED billboards and all that. Yeah. So, if you want to send a message to the regulators, then this is the place to. But
yes,
go ahead.
Just a last word on this one. Educating customers is an idea. Incentivizing customers is a better idea, I think. And the best idea for me is actually not asking them to do anything, but we do it for them. Take that router example, Afzal. I mean, we can have smart routers that shut themselves down.
Correct.
So we don't need to educate or incentivize. We just do it. So what I envision is where we can add the most value is a real-time life that we're helping build. where machines actually do it for the people, and a real-time life where asset utilization is maximized. To Albern's point, autonomous vehicles, so that we can have less cars, because you can use the same car because it's autonomous and you will have less of them on the street. Or smart manufacturing, where manufacturing and logistics is real time, so you don't have product wastage and product sitting idle in warehouses, but it's real time produced to consume. So that kind of smart and real time life is what's going to make the difference, I think.
Very well said, Gökhan. Gary, there's some questions in the chat box. Do you want to address those?
Well, I have someone monitoring the chat box, but they haven't.
Yeah, so there's a question from Marina asking how much solar is being planned for data center, campus in time, TM, Digi, etc. So I think all of us sort of solar panel out our rooftops as much we can, and the best way to look at it is that the taller. So if you take a typical plot ratio in Cyberjaya, you're talking about 1 to 7, 1 to 8, right? So for an acre, for every 10,000 square feet of land, you can build about 80,000 square feet at max. That's what Majlis Perbandaran Sepang lets you do. But the thing is that because you have a single rooftop, the most you can get is only 10,000 square feet worth of solar power. So you could have multiple floors. So if you take, for example, the typical setup of a data center that's built by TM, NTT, or us, or Bridge, they're all about the same kind of configuration, because we kind of got them optimal down to 60,000 square feet per block. But the entire land size is still only 240,000 square feet. So typically the solar power can be used for lighting and for some cooling, but it can't be used, unfortunately, to power the servers, just to answer the question.
Well, since we're at the questions, would you consider alternative option for of reusing batteries or redistributing batteries among your towers, hubs, and buildings? I'm not sure what the intent of the question is, but if you have anything
we do already. Several.
We do that already.
Yeah, we basically, and some of us have basically gotten rid of batteries, right? So essentially, and again, I talk about data centers, you can use an uninterruptible power system and an inline UPS where you need to store power in a battery. Some of us have gone to dynamic UPSs, which are big pieces of flywheel spinning at 3,000 RPM to cut off before the genset comes in. So that reduces batteries altogether. And several of us in Malaysia are already doing that.
Yeah, and I assume also the other question about the circular economy, I'm sure that all of you are rerouting all the products that reach the end of their useful life.
Yep.
Yeah. We've got just a limited amount of time left, and I'd like to give everyone a chance to say some words to close. But just before we do that, may I just ask everyone to pose for the required photograph. So if the Secretariat would take the photograph on the count of 3.
3,
are you ready?
2, 1. Just one more time. Thank you so much, guys. This has been a great session. Thank you very, very much.
Okay. So,
Okay,
okay. All right. So just a bit of time for the 1 or 2 points that you'd like to leave the audience with this evening. Perhaps we could begin with Mr. Idham of Celcom Axiata.
Yeah, very good points. I thought very good discussion. Thank you, Gary. If there's one thought that I think that we made to rethink is, one is under this new condition, this new normal, some of the shift of where the power is being used has shifted more towards the home. And people are using more power at home, people are using more network at home, which actually have a strain, ended up us using more on the network. So some kind of policies around how to promote this, or even there is some promotion today on some of this new renewable energy at home, but maybe even making even more aggressive towards that, so people adopt more to the homes. Yeah, I think that's something that I think we can get the government to help, so that in this new normal. Yeah.
Would you have any thoughts on sort of leaping on the carbon neutral or net zero emissions bandwagon?
Yeah, per home, for example, right? Like what I have done.
Okay, all right. Moving on to Mr. Imri Mokhtar.
Yes, thanks, Gary. Yeah, so I think moving forward, TM is committed. Yeah, I think it's under the broader commitment of ESG, and particularly a larger focus needs to be on the environment and so forth. Yeah, I've shared the plans. Yeah. And what would be different for TM is that it's not just going to be our technology or strategic plan that's going to be the focus on a yearly basis, but also in tandem on the ESG blueprint as well, as I mentioned, with a lot more focus on the environment. So we are committed, and it will benefit, I guess, TM as an organization, and I think it would be embraced positively by the customers that we serve, as well as our investors as well. So it's just good business sense, as well as responsible corporate citizen of Malaysia to embrace this wholeheartedly, and we are committed for that. Thank you.
Thank you. And before I give the floor to Mr. Albern, I do need to record a note of gratitude from the organizers for because it was Mr. Albern that actually proposed and then brought together all 6 of the CEOs that you see in front of you this evening. No mean feat, and we're indebted to
you.
you.
Answered who the industry spokesperson is, Gary. So Albern is our industry spokesperson.
Dr. Gary, the sales pitch is very different. I told them that this gets them a ticket to heaven, so that's why it is.
Your closing comments.
No, but I think a couple of key takeaways for me has been, one, from an industry perspective, there's a lot more that this industry can work together on, and it's I think it was highlighted by the CEO, so that's great. I hope consumers and the ones in the audience continue to give us ideas, because one is we don't have all the answers. This is something that we all have to jointly own as Malaysians. Driving this ambition. So you at least have 6 brands here that are extremely open to feedback and continuous suggestions. And I think if you can take that away, then at least you have 6 brands that care what happens to Malaysia and Malaysians going forward. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Albern. Mr. Gökhan?
First of all, thank you again for bringing us together. This was one topic that we hadn't discussed among ourselves, and similar to other topics that we do discuss, I think it has been helpful. Couple next steps for me is, we talked about the dilemma. We forecast a future where our traffic and usage and energy consumption will increase while we're talking about reducing it. So that means that we need to work harder. We need to work harder, smarter, and again, all together. And to Albern's point, we need to make sure that we own it with the government, the incentives that we talked about, and with the consumers, with their choice for brands like us who are trying to do the right thing. Thanks.
Thank you, Gökhan. Mr. Wong, HG?
Thank you, Dr. Gary, and thank you for the invitation. I think I think everything has been said, but I think in terms of the climate change, it's real. It's coming, and it's coming fast and furious. So I think being a responsible corporate, I think this is the least we can do. Okay, I think being in the mobile industry, I think we are able to communicate and we are able to touch a lot of consumer out there in terms of bringing more awareness in terms of the climate change. And in terms of internally, I think we are looking at technology, or we are looking at partners, how we deploy those technologies in order to help the consumers or even enterprises in terms of making the right decision. It's not only just for the climate, but it's also make good business sense, because that will also reduce their operating costs in the process as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. And our final CEO, last but not least, definitely, Mr. Afzal.
Okay. Did we hear from Idham? I don't think we had a chance to hear from Idham.
I was the first one to go.
Oh, were you? Okay.
So you want to hear a bit more from me?
always. No. So I think consumers should hold us to a higher standard. Completely echo what Gökhan says. If there was a green index, you would probably buy your services from the greenest company, right? And I think it's the millennials that are driving this, and it's great. So hold us accountable. Maybe you want to tell Morph to go and say the greener you are, the less tax you pay. I mean, it's a serious thing. We talk about it in terms of carbon tax credit, but imagine there was a green index. We would all be rushing to do that, so we'd be incentivized that way. And the third thing I want to say, I think we need to be like the government of China. Like literally, they can go out there and say, youngsters, you can only game 3 hours a week. They're not apologetic about it, etc., right? And if you go out there and do something ridiculous like that, which is not a bad idea anyway, that will reduce consumption in areas that are basically have a net social effect as well, right? So we're going to go to the government of Malaysia and say that our resident Turkish expert has said to shut down all services between midnight and 7 a.m. every day using, what is it called, TR67 in our routers, where we can log into our routers, whatever it's called. Right, etc., etc. So we support this. It's a brave move only a Turk can make. We support it.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Dr. Gary. Thank you.
And
thanks to the audience.
It is the balance. I don't miss cataloging and storing stacks and stacks of photographs. I don't miss, there's so many ways. I don't miss driving around in circles when I'm lost. And I think you gentlemen have been part of making all of the country much more efficient. The question is exactly how efficient do we have to be as a civilization to have a good quality of life? And I think Sunita has mentioned before, this platform is meant to be a permanent platform, and we very much relish the idea of having you gentlemen back together sometime when we have some new things and exciting technologies to talk about. The only thing I have left to do is to remind the viewers this evening of the blog post, the views of the of the speakers this evening. The panelists will be there. Some of the responses to some of the written questions, perhaps. Do look out for the report when it finally does come out. And once again, with a huge note of thanks to those in the background who've been working tirelessly to make this operation as smooth as possible, to Sunita and all of the secretariat, and especially to you, ladies and gentlemen, who are watching, and to our 6 esteemed CEOs this evening who have given, I think, an amazing amount of time to be here to speak with you. Thank you, and we'll sign off with a brief 1-minute video from GSMA, once again, Progressive Leadership for a Digital Age. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and have a good night.